Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Molecast. Thank you guys so much for coming. It was kind of funny because when I came to the practice room earlier, I was like, oh, well, maybe we'll just be like a smaller crowd for today. And then everybody just showed up. So thank you guys so much for coming. So before we get started into the episode, as always, server announcements. The first announcement is happy birthday to server mom. Yay! Happy birthday, Annie. I hope that you're having a really fun day. From all of us on the server to you, I hope that you have a really great day and another awesome year. So happy birthday. Number 2, more congratulations are in order. We are officially partnered and verified the Ray Chen Violin Discord. So congratulations to Ray, congratulations to the server. What does that mean? Well, now there can't be a second Ray Chen Violin server out there. There's only one, that's us. And now that we're partnered, basically there are certain perks that we don't depend as much on the server boosters for. However, Annie's here! Happy birthday, Annie! Woo! Happy birthday! So we're partnered, which means that there's certain features that we don't depend as much for the server boosters for anymore. However, we still need you, server boosters. Why? Because we need our emotes. That's right. If the more server boosters that we have, we can keep the amount of spaces for emotes. There's also file upload sizes that we can also maintain. So keep supporting the Ray Chen Violin server. Be a server booster today. And even, it's also Hector's birthday? Oh my gosh, happy birthday to Hector. Yes. Oh my gosh, what a great day. And then even more congratulations are in order. I feel like this is really just the day that we're all celebrating. Congratulations on another great server recital for everyone who performed yesterday. I got up at 2 a.m., but it was definitely well worth it. Everyone did a great job. Thank you guys so much for putting in the effort and the time into the performance. We greatly appreciate it. Hector, happy birthday! Yay! Thank you guys so much for another great server recital. Keep track of information in the recital in the concert hall section. We will announce the next recital sometime soon. So if you thought, hey, this is something I really want to be a part of, don't fret. We'll probably be having another recital sometime in the future. So check it out. Next server announcement, don't forget that the masterclass series is still going on. Prusno will be hosting masterclasses on both October 3rd and October 4th. Take a look at the pinned announcement in general as to who will be performing what. And if you're interested in either hosting a masterclass or being a part of a masterclass, please contact Beth. I'm not going to ping her, but Beth will be able to provide you with more information and hopefully guide you to the right place to either sign up to be a masterclass instructor or to sign up for a masterclass. So check it out. Finally, the Basement Gang just recently finished up with their art contest. The entries were amazing. I honestly would have voted for all of the entries. So what I did was I just didn't vote for any because I was like, everyone's just going to get a heart blob for me anyway because everyone's more talented than I am because all I can do is draw circles. But congratulations to everyone who participated. Again, your art was amazing. I wish I had that level of talent. And congratulations to the contest winners, Melody, Greta, and ALB Violin. Hopefully you guys enjoy your nitro for the month and hope to see more art from you guys and everyone on the server again soon. As always, if you guys have any more server announcements, please. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot the last server announcement, but we can tie it into this too. If you guys have any other server events or things that you want to include the entire server on, please let me know or have them pinned in general. Also, special shout out to Braden, our amazing mod. If you go to About, which, I mean, who really does? But if you go now to About, we have a server events calendar. Yes! And the server events calendar is really cool because basically it takes all of the events that we have and puts them in one place. And, shocker, everyone just, if you're not sitting down, sit down right now. Because it changes the time zones for you. No more math. We don't have to calculate what time things are. So exciting. Except the problem is now I've like been able to convert time zones in like both, EU gang and Australia Asia gang. So everyone's celebrating in the chat like, yes. And it's also a Google calendar. So you can incorporate this calendar within your own calendars too, which is really, really nice. So check it out. Braden did a lot of like great work just getting it all set up for us and trying to like teach me, the boomer, like how it works and how, how like, oh man, how does this actually work? So thank you so much to Braden. Thank you so much to all the mods. Check out the calendar. Molecast episodes will be in there. Other server events will be in there. So thank you. And with that, let's go ahead and move on to the Molecast. So, today's episode is about active listening and, how much, like, what is the science of active listening? And in the creation of this episode, typically I like to have a general structure of going into the science of a topic and then applying it to classical music. However, this week on Twitter, I read an amazing tweet from a scientist that I greatly respect. And it was about how scientists have trouble with storytelling. As scientists, we're trained to present data to, our colleagues and our peers. But what people crave most now more than ever is stories. Because stories help us to connect, not only to each other, but to the world around us. And when I read that quote and I looked back on this Molecast episode, I just knew it was garbage. I was just like, oh my gosh, this entire episode is garbage. So I completely threw it out. I'm so sorry, guys. Also, my allergies are starting to flare up again because welcome to fall. Trees are a thing. So I completely trashed the episode. And I restarted. But the framework of this episode is more of a story. So this is going to be new. That's kind of why, if you've been following me on Instagram, seeing me around the server, I've been a little more stressed lately because this is a new format for me. But because we're such a wholesome community, I figured that this would be a safe place for me to try this format. And if it worked, great. And if it didn't, great too. Go back to the old format. So let's go ahead and just dive right into it. So for this week's Molecast question, I asked the science server, and most times when I ask Molecast questions, I'm asking them either in the science server or in my Instagram account. And the questions that I asked for this week were, when did you start actively listening to classical music? And how often do you actively listen to classical music? And, it was really funny because a lot of people were kind of like me when they answered this question. They were either starting off like listening to active music, either when they were first starting their instrument, or they just started listening during quarantine, which I found to be really, really interesting because, we live in a society where, we're all busy. We all have a lot of distractions going on. But quarantine forced us to be quiet and to actually, listen instead of being distracted by, social media and other obligations. And, the answers were pretty much, either ranged in those two camps. Either, people started when they were young, or people started very, very recently. However, there was one story that we're going to examine in great detail today. And you may have seen this person on the server. I believe she's currently in chat right now. And that is Rina. Rina she plays violin, she plays piano, she also plays oboe. And Rina has the reputation on the server of being someone who has an amazing ear. She can listen to different sounds, and she can basically understand what you're playing and how to fix it in order to develop a different sound. Rina is now the most popular person on the server. And you guys might have seen me recently in the server having one-on-one conversations with Rina, because I was really interested in finding out her story. And how she was able to develop her active listening skills, and what she credits for growing her musical ear. And as I'm talking about Rina's story, we're going to break at certain points and examine the data and the research that help to expand further on these different topics. So, So when I was first talking with Rina, Rina said that, she grew up with music. Both of her brothers were involved in classical music. She listened to classical music when she was very, very little. So music was something that wasn't foreign to her. And when we jump right into the data, there's many, many studies that have shown that children at young ages are able to listen more carefully to music versus adults. And that's just because of the brain development at that time. And what Rina described was that she initially started, her first instrument was violin. She started on a box violin when she was 3, and she started on her real violin when she was 5. And she she learned through the Suzuki method. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Suzuki method is basically a series of books that rely on not only group learning, but also rely on listening skills. So they give you recordings, and you go home and you listen to these recordings backwards and forwards as you're learning your pieces. The funny thing is that there's actually a lot of research that uses the Suzuki method to study auditory learning. And some of the studies, one being scientists studied the effect of musical training on the maturation of the human hearing and nervous system, also known as the auditory nervous system. So what they did was they studied how students who either played violin with with Suzuki violin lessons, or students that had no musical training. And what they did was they presented these students with a series of repetitive sounds, just like a beep, that's the exact same tone. And then they presented a different tone in the middle of that series. And what they found was that the strengths of the responses were evidenced in the Suzuki students, but they didn't see the same kinds of auditory responses in the students that did not study violin. So the Suzuki method in this study and a couple other studies that I read showed that students had a much stronger auditory nervous system when they were on the Suzuki method versus having no lessons at all. But I asked the question, do you really need Suzuki though? Like, I didn't learn from Suzuki. I learned through a, public school program does my hearing differ from somebody who actually went through a Suzuki program? And what they found was that, again, it didn't really matter how musicians were trained. The only thing that did matter was that musicians that were trained had a much stronger auditory nervous system versus those that did not. And the thing that was most surprising was that musicians had to use their full brain in order to listen to these sounds. So when they did MRI scans, they saw that different parts of the brain were glowing versus non-musicians when they were presented with the same sounds. So it presents the hypothesis that active listening actually takes your full brain in order to fully process the music that you're being presented with. And if you remember from not last Molecast, but 2 Molecasts ago, I told you that, our brain is constantly being presented with information, and out of the 100% of information that's taken in by our brain, only 1% of that is actually being processed. And I'm looking in the chat right now. That's probably the reason why a lot of musicians can't listen to classical music while studying. So it's because that we want to actively listen and use our full brains, but we can't because we're trying to get done with science or math homework. Rina went through the Suzuki program. So on top of listening to classical music as a young child, then she went through the Suzuki method. And then when Rina went into high school, this is when her story becomes really, really interesting. Because not only was Rina learning, violin at the time still, she was also learning piano, and she was involved in marching band and symphonic wind ensemble. And what's really interesting from someone who has friends in marching band is marching band requires you to do a lot of active listening, because I was very uncoordinated as growing up. Gym class was not my favorite, but my friends would tell me that you would have to listen for people who were on the other side of the football field when you were playing. And a football field is 100 yards. A marching band can easily take up 2/3 of that space, possibly the full 100 if you're, the Ohio State. But a nice, high school marching band, you can take up a significant size. So, all right, you're trying to march, which that's not going to happen for me. I'd fall flat on my face. Then you have to be able to pick out your part. You have to still be listening to your section, because if you're not listening to your section, you're going to be lost. And you have to be listening for other parts around you. So while you're moving, so your active listening skills are definitely being developed during that time. Now, I tried my hardest to find studies of people who were involved in marching band versus people who were involved in orchestra to see if their active listening skills were different. I could not find any. That is definitely a study that someone has to do in the future, because I would love to find out whether marching band participants have different listening skills than those involved in orchestra, because not only, like in orchestra, we're all sitting. There's no, the basses aren't picking up their basses and moving 20 yards in the opposite direction, or you're not seeing the violin section get up, or in the second violin section go into an opposite direction. This question, as far as I could tell, hasn't been studied, but again, this is just a simple Google search. There could be other labs that could be doing different things. So Rina described the listening skills that she got from both groups. And she said active listening in orchestra helps you to know exactly where you are. Whereas band, this is also helping you with this as well. but in a very different context, because rushing and dragging are super important, since you're not only competing with your part, but you're also competing with distance. And you have to know all of the parts, because the problem is that if someone's really, really far away, you have to know at any particular beat what part should be playing and what part shouldn't be playing. So chatting with Rina about this, I realized right away that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to, have like a great band and good listening skills. And obviously that is not only important in marching band, but she was able to take that and apply that to many different musical skills that she is currently still pursuing. So from that, I also took a look. Again, I couldn't find much on marching band versus orchestra, but I did find other studies looking at vocalists, instrumentalists, and non-musicians. So another study that was involved in, distinguishing between two different frequencies and different pitches, examined 61 young adult women, 20 vocalists, 20 instrumentalists, 20 non-musicians. And what they found was that musicians, both the vocalists and the instrumentalists, were able to detect pitch changes earlier, and the able to distinguish between two different pitches was smaller than those that were non-musicians. So again, your auditory senses are being developed. Both vocal and instrumentalist musicians possess superior sensory memory representations. So there's a lot of different connections going on with the brain, which again goes back to the original point that you're using your entire brain to actively listen versus, maybe only using the right side of your brain, which is something that has definitely propagated within popular culture and in some scientific and classical music conversations. So after listening to this part of Rina's story, how she was involved in orchestra, involved in bands, still doing solo work, I then went back to the Molecast data, and I asked the next question, which was if people were involved in ensembles. So whether you're involved in band, whether you're involved in orchestra, or whether you're just doing solo work. And actually for this answer, the answers were all over the place. It's kind of funny because when I ask these Molecast questions, there's usually like a general consensus among the group, like we're all involved in orchestra, we're all involved in X, Y, or Z. But surprisingly, everybody was everyone had very, very different answers. Some people were involved in orchestra. Other people were involved in string ensembles. Some people were not involved in any sort of classical music group. And some people had their own non-formal groups, so like someone played with a friend, some duets, or accompanied somebody. And Beakless makes actually a really good point. The group that tend to not have a lot of group work or chamber music work was pianists, which is sadly understandable because pianos aren't easy to transport until they have the pocket piano or something. But the thing is that pianists are very, very important because, we need, there's piano concertos. Pianists are involved in quartets, quintets, other ensemble groups. There are also, there's piano, but there's also keyboard. So I know one year my high school marching band recruited someone who played piano to play keyboard for one of the marching pieces that they had to do. Luckily, that person did not have to march because I don't even know what would have happened. But they were involved in that. And just scrolling through the answers, Another thing that a lot of people also did say, and they did volunteer this information, was that because of COVID, a lot of group ensembles haven't been able to meet. Or in the case of my orchestra, now everything is virtual. So you have to like record your part, upload the audio and video separately. But it's not the same as being in a group. So a lot of group work has been disrupted or postponed, which leaves this void of how do we continue work on our active listening skills when we're not involved in a group. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the episode. But Rina did say that she found through her experiences that immersing in music as a solo isn't enough. She found that once she became involved in piano, that playing music with other people and playing music in a group helped to grow her musical ear a lot more than just playing by herself and just listening to recordings. And she said if she could suggest one thing to people would be to encourage group work, to get involved in, local orchestras, local symphonic wind ensembles, or make your own group. Actually, here in Chicago, I was involved in an amateur quartet that involved a flute, an oboe, and a cello. Essentially, the violin became the viola. The power of Telemann. How to take a violin down 2 pegs. Give him Telemann. And it was funny when I met up with my ensemble. They were like, "Oh yeah, so we have 3 solo instruments and this cello. So I guess you're now the viola." And I was like, "Woo! I've become a viola player." Check that off my bucket list. And the sad part is like Telemann could have easily like put in a viola there, but it was just like, maybe for the memes, like I'm totally gonna put a violin there, just knock this person down. There's totally a story there. I don't know what the story is, but like Telemann did it. Telemann was just like, I'm gonna bring this violin player down like 3 pegs, and they're becoming a viola. Happy birthday, Annie. Have a good rest of your day. Mozart hated the flute. Maybe Telemann hated violins. Oh man, that requires this. And getting back to Rina's story, she definitely encourages group work. And when I asked her, when you were first developing your listening skills, did your teachers help you in the active listening process? And Rina, I'm so sorry, Rina. Too many. Rina's teachers did a lot of listening to recordings. So they would say, okay, well, let's listen to, this recording or that recording. And she really didn't, in her words, have the listening to be musical until she started her piano lessons. So when she was well into her violin studies and she started to take up piano, did her piano teacher teach her how to be musical? And really, she said that the basis of her musicality and her ear came from learning piano. Oh, I'm so sorry, Rina. She started piano at the same time. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry, Rina. And really it was, this, between her, experiences of being in band, being in orchestra, and having some guidance. Hello! It really helped her with her active listening and the development of her ear. And then I asked Rina as a beginner, because I am getting back into classical music. I am an amateur. How can I improve my active listening skills? Because, as someone who is, trying to develop these skills, what should I listen for? And Rina gave me a lot of advice. And I told Rina, I was like, well, Molecast is only an hour. So, like, I'll try to say things in, certain as much as I can. But Rina and I also discussed maybe having some sort of like side episode in the future, or some sort of Q&A where you can sit down and actually ask questions. So if I don't do this section justice, I'm sorry. But some of the things that Rina suggested was, the first thing that she listens to is tone. And it's funny because Rina was in my practice room yesterday, and I came in and I was like, yes, I'm going to get my hour of practice time in while I'm in lab at 5 a.m. in the morning. And Rina was like, no, tone. You've got to go back and fix your tone. So practice was totally I was like, well, guess we're working on tone today. But that's the first thing that she listens to. And one of the questions that a lot of violin players on the server have always asked, and we've always wondered, and I had to ask this question to Rina, was how do you know, like, just from listening, because obviously none of us have our videos active when we're practicing, like the problems that we're having, because Rina could immediately tell me during yesterday's practice, she went, Mole, you need to have more pressure on your bow, and you need to be using more bow. And I was like, how do you know that? And Rina said, again, it comes from experience, and it comes from time, because since Rina was studying violin from a really long time, and she's been actively listening in, a number of different situations, what she does is she envisions the sounds that we're making. So using me as the example, she could envision me using this short bow with not a lot of pressure. And she said, Mole, you're having a meek sound. And I like the words that she used, because using a meek sound, I can immediately visualize, oh, okay, I don't want to be meek. I want to be strong. And I could dig a little further into my psyche and say, oh, the reason why I have a meek sound is if somebody walks into this laboratory right now and sees me practicing, I'm going to get yeeted. When she said that envisioning takes time, and to be able to replicate that situation also takes time. But it also goes back into the studies that I was describing earlier, that when we actively listen, we have to use our whole brains to do it. And it's not just, the left side of our brain, which is analytical, versus the right side, which is more creative. It truly takes the whole brain in order to actively listen, because not only are you trying to, re-envision and recreate the sound using, more of the creative facets of our brain, which might be more of a right lobe thing, but you also need to analyze the technical aspects of it, pressure, contact point, where your bow is between the bridge and the fingerboard, for those of you who are string players, understanding more of the analytical side to not only understand the situation that's being presented to you, but how you're able to adjust it. Oh, rip Jenna. Rina's description and Rina's story is really supported by the data. And as we continued talking, she talked about things such as articulation and musicality. Now, Rina did say that explaining musicality was incredibly tricky, and I think there's many videos that also have trouble explaining musicality. So I understand as a beginner. Someday I'll understand the true definition. But she said it's the sound you're producing. That was like the best way that she could explain it. And I think the final piece that both I could definitely resonate with, both as a scientist and as a musician, is, does the person understand the piece that they're playing? And when I read up on other, books and classical music sites and scientific studies, the data was very overwhelming in this department. You have to understand fully the piece that you're playing. And understanding requires listening to the piece multiple times. The research has shown that you cannot actively listen to music in a disruptive environment. So it has to be quiet. You can't have Discord open. So no Discord, rip. And like, you also have to understand the history behind what you're studying, so the composer and the composer's tendencies. And actually that was really interesting because when I looked at, so as some of you may know on the server, I've been kind of a Telemann nut the past 3 months, and I'm learning these Telemann fantasies, which Telemann is in the same time period as Bach. I think Telemann was Bach's kid's godfather. Close friends, somewhat rivals. I consider them frenemies. But basically, when I look at some of Telemann's pieces, someone in the practice room asked me, how am I able to sight read this so well? And I was like, oh, that's really easy. It's because Telemann uses the same similar motif in different spots. So for example, as I'm looking at this Telemann 7 Allegro, which I was suffering with this morning, I'm still really salty about it. There are certain sections of 16th notes that alternate between the two strings, and that motif comes up not once, not twice, but 3 times. The man really loved this motif. He also really loves a certain chord structure whenever he's playing. So he's a big fan of fifths. I don't know why. He obviously loves pain. He's just, I'm convinced, I'm wholeheartedly convinced that Telemann had a grudge against a violinist, and he was just like, I'm going to take this guy down. I'm going to take him down with fifths, and I'm going to put him in a quartet, and he's going to become the viola player. I'm convinced. This is, no one can convince me otherwise. But there's different motifs that come up again and again as I'm learning these fantasias. And I remember the first fantasia I learned, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really hard. Not sure if I'm ready for this. But the more fantasias I learn, the more I'm understanding how Telemann thinks. Whether or not that's a good thing, I don't know. But it is becoming a lot easier. And it's because I'm starting to understand the pieces that I'm playing. And Rina goes back to, again, this breaking down your part into, patterns and similarities, being able to visualize. These are all things that are involved in the active listening process. And the final thing is that, active listening is basically putting these pieces together in order to make it your own. And she described it as sort of like music is just basically an instruction manual. These composers have left us these instructions, and it's our job as the musicians to compare, this instruction manual that might be from IKEA to, to compare this instruction manual with how other people have interpreted the instruction manual by listening to different recordings, to listening to myself when I play, and to listening to others who are able to play that as well. Which, it really, it was great speaking with her because it helped me to understand more of my playing and where I want to go as a musician. If one Bach becomes IKEA, you got to get those Poang chairs somehow. It was really interesting, and just trying to, in my quest to finding this research, I ask the question, when we're doing these Molecasts and we're discussing, these connections between hard science, neurobiology, molecular biology, psychology, and classical music, if there are, labs out there that actually study these questions. And I was like, well, let me look outside my back door here in the Chicago area and see if there are any labs like that. So first, spoiler alert, there are not that many. There are only 2 labs in the Chicago area that I could find that study acoustics and psychoacoustics. So the first lab I'm going to talk about is a lab at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And this lab, they study acoustics and vibrations in a variety of different contexts, mainly with MRIs and imaging, and applying acoustics and vibrations to a lot of imaging structures. So like imaging lungs, imaging muscle structure and function. They are also involved in using sounds to study lung disease diagnosis and helping to train physicians by doing non-invasive imaging techniques, which I thought was really, really cool, but not really what we're interested here on the server. However, then I found Northwestern. And Northwestern said, we are here to help. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Northwestern University is also home to the Beanan School of Music. To all the cellists out there, I'm sure your ears are perking up because apparently they have a cello department that literally can destroy sound. I don't know how they do it. But when I found the psychoacoustics laboratory here at Northwestern, they study how practice affects auditory perceptual skills. And I will actually drop this link in the chat if you guys are interested in learning more. Woo! What they basically study is a general model for learning, which occurs over 2 phases, acquisition and consolidation. And the acquisition phase is the actual period of training. So like when you have a lesson, when you're actually in the middle of doing practice. And the consolidation phase is the period after training ends, which memories are being formed during acquisition and are transformed from a fragile state to a more stable state. And I mean, looking at their website, it's absolutely, it's so interesting. They are starting to do work in active listening and understanding how, passive listening versus active listening is important in the learning process. And the thing is as I've been saying for a couple episodes now, they also say here that this work is of value because surprisingly little is known about the kinetics and mechanism of skill learning in humans. And a clinical benefit in research and perceptual learning is that more effective training strategies can be developed, not only for those with perceptual disorders, but also to improve our own learning skills. I really enjoy doing Molecasts because Molecast allows me to take the 2 things that I love so much, science and classical music, and put them together into an episode that hopefully you guys understand. Maybe not, and you guys are really nice. But it's something that I really, really enjoy. But one of the questions that has always plagued me is how can someone who is interested in both fields, someone who's really interested in classical music and someone who's interested in science, get into the research of that? And finding labs like this and getting more involved with labs like this is one step in the right direction. Because as I've also said before, science is very similar to classical music. We tend to stay in our ivory towers, and we don't talk to anyone unless we absolutely have to. And when we absolutely have to, it's usually too late. So by having these kinds of conversations and discovering these kinds of laboratories and efforts that go across disciplines, hopefully it helps lead us in the right direction. So yeah, I definitely wanted to make sure I shared that link with you. Right now, I know that a lot of the schools here in the Chicago area are currently in rephase mode. So not all of them are back in their laboratories yet. Not all schools are fully open. I think most of the schools here in the Chicago area are like half open. It's really weird. But if you are interested, or if there are questions that you want to ask this laboratory, you can always DM me your questions, or you can message them yourself. They do have a contact us page, and the thing is that most scientists love getting fan mail, or questions, because someone actually is really interested about their research. Take it from a scientist who knows. So just to recap, this episode today is of a different format. And it really stemmed from a tweet that said, as scientists, we need to be better storytellers, because, people aren't looking for data. People are looking for stories. And stories help us not only to connect with the research that we're studying, because we can make a story in our head, but we can connect to other people across disciplines who may not have the same expertise that we do. And because of that, my entire design for Molecast completely changed this week. And that was really thanks to Rina. I'm going to ping you again, Rina. I'm so sorry, because you do deserve a lot of credit for this. And talking about Rina's story, she grew up with music and listening to music, not only from her family, but also by being very involved in different ensembles. And she not only learned from these ensembles, but she also learned through the Suzuki method. And research overwhelmingly has shown that students, not only children, but also adults, benefit from musical learning because it helps to strengthen our auditory and nervous system, as well as it also helps show that active listening and active musical learning requires the entire brain, not just a left versus right hemisphere, with the left being more analytical, more science-driven, and the right being more creatively driven. It requires your entire brain in order to fully process music. And talking to Rina, learning how to distinguish parts from each other really came from her piano training, her violin training, and her marching band experience, which I still think is so cool. And having to know all the parts at every single beat was incredibly important. And beginning your active listening skills, again, doing this in a non-distracting environment, silence, no Discord, and examining different things such as tone, articulation. A lot of studies also said not to focus on too many things at once, but have multiple listening sessions where you only focus on a couple things at a time. And finally, just leaving with the fact that active listening is piecing together all the individual parts in order to make it something of your own. And that composers have left us these written down instructions, sort of like a manual. I like that analogy because I also use that analogy when I describe DNA, RNA, and proteins, that, music is essentially in that exact same structure. But these instructions allow us to make notes and allow us to compare ourselves with other people who are playing, not only professionals, but also other people who could be practicing this piece and interpreting it in different ways. And the other 2 points that we wanted to leave you with, because as someone who's just starting to actively listen to classical music and continuing to actively listen to classical music, the more you play, the more basics you're obtaining, and whether or not you're a musician or a non-musician, the more you play or listen, the more skills that you're obtaining. So it's okay if you're just getting started. Everyone's got to start from somewhere. But what's important is that you continue on the journey and you don't, stop because things get super, super confusing. If you break it down into smaller parts, whether or not you are a musician or you're a non-listener, maybe focusing first on the violins or first on the trumpet section or maybe the percussion, and then just going out from there, you'll be able to grow your ear with time. And that's really the big thing that I took away from my discussion with Rina and looking at the data, is that the more time that you've spent actively listening, the stronger that your ear will be. But if you're someone like me who's getting ready, who's approaching, 30 years old and just getting started, it's okay. Like, no time like the present. You don't have to be a 6-year-old prodigy to not begin to develop your ear. You can develop your ear at any time. Maybe it'll take a little more legwork, but hey, hard work, it's a little bit of more hard work, but you'll get a lot more fulfillment out of the music than someone who just listens casually and goes back to doing dishes. Blue, I don't believe that for a minute. I don't believe that for a hot minute. I don't believe that for a hot minute. I know that for a fact because I listened to your recital yesterday. And the other point, because I asked Rina at the end, if you could tell the audience anything, so that they could, take away and help to improve their listening skills or improve their playing, what would you tell them? That music is a collective, and that as a musician, you are a part of the collective. Whether you are a second violin or a first violin, hell yeah, or a soloist, you are a part of the collective. And the thing is that soloists aren't really solo, because and Rina was talking about this, when you play as a soloist, you have to encompass the surrounding sound, and you've got to keep track of your part, because obviously you don't want to run your solo part off the rails. But you also have to keep track of what's going on around you. And Rina said that good soloists know what goes on behind them. So it looks like a very cohesive group, a part of the collective. And she said that because, on the server, a lot of people are working on, violin concertos. My favorite, it has to be this one. But she said that as we're practicing, violin concertos and other solo works, that sometimes she notices that we forget about the additional parts and all the other moving pieces, because we're so focused on getting the arpeggios clean, or we're so focused on, making sure that this part of the transition is going in smoothly. But she said, as we're practicing, we have to remember that there's an entire orchestra that's going on behind you, or a piano part that's going on behind you. And by making sure that your part blends with the rest of it, it will help with establishing the collective. So that was, she said, if someone needed like a real life example of how they could take active listening and improve upon it, it would be through, listening to a violin concerto, whatever concerto you're working on. That's probably my favorite so far. And improving upon it by making sure that you understand what all the parts are doing at the same time. And with that, oh my gosh, I'm actually ending Molecast on time. So that is Molecast for this week. But I'm kind of excited for next week's episode. And I'm going to also shout out to Q. I think you're still here. If not, it's all good. So Q, a couple weeks ago, Q was conducting an experiment in one of the practice rooms. And this experiment and conversation that I had with Q and a couple other comments such as sexy is round helped to spark this conversation on the physics of sound and why, certain things sound better than other things and why are violins shaped the way they are. And it all comes down to physics. And I see Justina Justina's like, I've been summoned. Physics king. So our next episode of the Molecast will be examining the physics of sound. And we're actually going to look into Q's data because Q's data is really interesting. It has the best curve, like R curve I've ever seen. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some other, sound and physics related things because, hey, why not? And it also won't pertain to violins. There'll also be some stuff regarding woodwinds and pianos as well. So hopefully you guys can join. That will be in a couple weeks. So if you check out the server calendar and about, it'll be posted there. But since we're all currently in chat, that will be on October 11th. And heads up, it's going to be 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So an hour earlier. Reason being, got some personal stuff going on. So we got to push it back a little earlier on Sunday, October 11th. So hopefully you guys can tune in. We can have some fun. Also, I wanted to make out this call too because this Molecast did start with Q's data, but I wanted to make sure that it was available for everybody. If you have a music experiment or something that's involved in classical music that you also want to chat about on the Molecast coming up, let me know. We can chat about it. If you have some awesome data, I would love to show it off. And I'm also hopefully going to do an experiment as well. So this will be a little more sciencey, but definitely still based in classical music. So hopefully you guys can check it out. So with that, hope you guys have a good rest of your day, night, wherever you may be, and chat soon. See you on the server. Bye, guys.